Let's talk about renewables today. Renewables is kind of a funny mix of different things. In ARP, my company, we have divided what we call the renewable basket into 4 sub-baskets because they are all subject to different dynamics. Number 1, solar. Number 2, wind. Number 3, electrification. And number 4, electric utilities. They're all slightly different. They're all impacted by different dynamics, and therefore you have to treat them a little differently. But one dynamic that they're all exposed to is the rapidly rising demand for electricity. And again, I recently talked about batteries, and obviously the growing demand for electric vehicles is a significant reason why overall electricity demand is rising so fast. But there's another reason, and that reason should not be underestimated, and that's the rise of the number of data centers around the world. Technology is introducing artificial intelligence, and the servers that are being installed in data centers around the world to do the job for these data centers are incredibly power hungry. And on an aggregate basis, data centers around the world now use more power than the entire country of Switzerland, which is quite astonishing. In previous presentations, I talked about what I called the Trump trades. And the fact is that it's not really any different than renewables. Trump trades are also a significant part of what's happening in the renewable space. Let's go back to COP28 in Dubai in late November of last year. The conference made it very clear that the popular support for the green agenda is losing momentum. It was almost as if the populace around the European community spoke with one voice when they voted out many Green members of the European Parliament. It was almost as if they said with one voice, we're happy to accept the green agenda, but we're not happy to accept if it comes with falling living standards. And therefore, you saw a significant shift in the European Parliament from left to right, or from green to non-green. I'm sure some political leaders will fight very hard against that trend, but I'm also sure that some political leaders will take advantage of this trend, of this new trend, and try and build a policy program which is not as green as what we have gotten used to in recent years. And that has, therefore, the whole green agenda has become a bit of an uphill task. Trump is clearly not committed to in the US, and neither is the European Parliament anymore in Europe. And therefore, you could argue that the road to net zero by 2050, which is really a sort of a global commitment, has certainly come into play. You could argue that the road is getting steeper and steeper, and that is indeed correct, because we haven't really seen any meaningful reduction in CO2 yet, and there are not that many years left before we have to end up at zero, and therefore the road is indeed getting steeper. I am getting seriously concerned about whether we will get to net zero by 2050, but I don't think we will drop the commitment to the green agenda, and therefore there are still investment opportunities to be made. Wind and solar have come to stay, I believe, but wind and solar do not offer the ultimate solution. Quite simply, you cannot build a modern day economy on something as unstable as wind and solar. Wind and solar are part of the solution, but they're not the only solution. And I think it's important that political leaders realize that. Just imagine that you cannot take your kids to school because you couldn't charge your car last night. Or imagine that you had to empty your freezer and fridge because everything you have to dump everything because you haven't had electricity for 3 years. I've been in South Africa many times over the last few years, and they suffer from lack of electricity quite regularly. And I'm pretty sure that if that were to happen in a modern Western European country or a North American country, there would be a popular uprising. People simply wouldn't accept that we couldn't get the electricity we need. And the world is becoming so electrified that it's no longer an option. We simply have to produce that electricity, and therefore wind and solar can only be part of the solution. Let's spend a minute or two on the four sort of sub-baskets that I mentioned earlier. And I think it's important to distinguish between wind and solar. Wind works best, obviously, in windy climates. Solar works best in sunnier climates. And it's quite frankly an economic disgrace. I know it's a strong word, but I think it's an economic disgrace to implement solar in countries where the sun doesn't shine very much, because it makes absolute no economic sense. What makes sense in Northern Europe is wind, and what makes sense in Southern Europe is solar. And because the two renewable energy forms depend on different microclimates, they can easily exist side by side. And therefore you don't, as an investor, you don't need to make the choice between wind and solar. Wind and solar can quite easily operate next to each other and will operate next to each other for many years to come. And therefore, if you want to take full advantage of this opportunity, you should invest in both. The third sub-basket that we operate with, electrification, is really about identifying companies that have developed a process or technology that can make the delivery more efficient. We have in our portfolio, we have a company, for example, that has automated the whole process. You don't need a human being pushing a button to make it work. It's all fully automated. But there are also a million other companies that benefit from this electrification process. And when it comes to electric utilities, I think it's important that you distinguish between what I call plain vanilla electric utilities and electric utilities that are committed to the green agenda, because they're not all committed. We have found that some electric utilities put far more money into the green transition than other utilities do. And we think governments all over the Western world will benefit these companies because large investments are really needed, and governments cannot make these investments on their own. They simply can't afford it. They need help from the corporate sector, and they will remember who stepped up and paid and made capital available at the right time and who did not. And therefore, I think the more green electric utilities will be paid back in kind with other benefits in the years to come, and therefore they will perform better. So select your electric utilities carefully. Again, give me a call if you want some names. That's relatively easy because not all of them should go into your portfolio. If you add it all up, all that I've talked about today regarding renewables, I think it's fair to say that it's a sort of a strange mix of things. You're right to ask, or you're entitled to ask, what on earth has electric utilities got to do with wind and solar? But as I said earlier, they all have one thing in common, and that one thing is really rapidly rising demand for electricity, and they will all benefit from that. The opportunity here is that the political agenda has changed a little bit in recent months. In the US, it's all about the fight between Harris and Trump. In Europe, it's really the shift in the European Parliament from left to right. And as I see it, this is a buying opportunity. I fully admit that green stocks don't go up every day. We have good days, but we also have bad days. But there have been many bad days more recently because of this shift in the political agenda, and I would take that as a buying opportunity.